Hi, my name is Carl Vonderau, and my first thriller, Murderabilia, was published by Midnight Inc. in July of 2019. It won an award at Left Coast Crime for the best debut mystery. And what I want to talk about today is where the name of the book came from. Murderabilia is an actual thing, and it both disgusts, fascinates, and outrages people. I discovered it really by accident. I was doing research for my book, and the father of my protagonist was a serial killer who took artistic black and white photos of his victims. I thought, was there really a serial killer who did that? And I discovered Harvey Glatman. In the 50s, he lured models to his apartment, promising that he was taking photographs for pulp magazines. He'd bind, assault, and kill them, dispose of their bodies, taking pictures the whole time. And I was kind of shocked and surprised that his pictures from 60 years ago are still available on the internet. I did more research and learned that there's a whole market for the art and collectibles made and used by serial killers. It's called Murderabilia. Even the name is kind of creepy. Murderabilia could be clothes, art, weapons, crime, photos, poetry, even letters. Just about anything touched by a killer. It could be hair, nail clippings, dentures, chipped from a killer's tombstone. It gets worse the more you research it. There's a whole growing market for Murderabilia with fluctuating prices. Value is mostly determined by the art medium and the notoriety of the killer who made it. The top sellers are artwork and letters. Paintings by someone like John Wayne Gacy have the highest values. There seems to be something on these sites for just about any fetish. Original and tribute art, gift and trading cards, hand tracings, photographs, action figures, autographs, cassette tapes, business cards, underwear. You can search by categories like mass shooters, females, blacks, satanic, and cannibals. It's really pretty unsettling stuff. But is the murderabilia market really that surprising? For thousands of years, the black arts have used hair and nail clippings for spells and totems like these. You can buy lots of replicas, but you can also buy real ones, which are very expensive. The Museum Winkel in Nijmegen is selling its real shrunken head for 49,000 euros. Even now, a revolver owned by Al Capone is for sale for $95,000. Here's a picture of it. It's a silver-plated Colt 38 Special. One of the earliest known instances of murderabilia profit was in 1997 when Elmer Wayne Henley held his first public art exhibition. Henley tortured, raped, and murdered 28 teenage boys. His exhibit was curated by his fans. He did portraits as well as landscapes and still life paintings. Would you pay $400 for this? In any case, the serial killer art market took off from when he started selling his work in the 90s. A man named Andy Cahan invented the term murderabilia. Here's his picture. He was a victims' rights advocate at the Houston Police Department in the late 90s. Cahan read that Arthur Shawcross, a man who tortured and killed 14 people, was selling his paintings out of his cell. Here's one called What Dreams Are Made Of. Some research contends that serial killers have a richer fantasy lives than the rest of us. I can't help wondering what significance the orange and yellow flames on the right corner might have, or the whirlpool on the water. Cahan called these collectibles murderabilia. He's worked ever since to stop the practice, which I'll talk about later. But the sales continue online and through private arrangements. One of the more shocking examples occurred in 2016. George Zimmerman, the killer of Trayvon Martin, put the handgun up for sale. He did it through a gun group's auction site. I guess it's a little bit reassuring that there was very little interest. And the public outcry was so great that the gun group had to withdraw the auction. But Zimmerman supposedly still sold the gun privately for $250,000. Then there's Adolf Hitler. In 2015, 14 paintings, watercolors, and drawings were sold at auction in Nuremberg to various buyers. The castle went for 100,000 euros, and the still life for 73,000. Buyers came from France, Germany, the United Arab Emirates, and Brazil. Brazil is an interesting case. After World War II, many Germans immigrated to the southern part of Brazil. So who are the most famous murderabilia killers? John Wayne Gacy is probably number one. He murdered 24 boys from 1972 to 78 in Chicago. He was put to death in 94, but his paintings survive and still keep increasing in value. More than 2,000 are in circulation. The only Gacy painting of a house was listed for $175,000. The painting shows the crawl spaces where he interned his victims. In prison, before his execution, Gacy first did oil paintings of Disney figures, birds and flowers. Bambi, Snow White, and Dumbo wouldn't draw attention from prison authorities. Most of his art focused on clowns. Here's Pogo the Clown. He used to dress up as a clown and entertain children at hospitals. He said that he did this to bring joy to people's lives. Later, collectors prodded him to paint darker images like skulls, witches, and monsters. The clown images have aroused the most controversy. They're so popular that Gacy painted them in batches like an assembly line. Almost all his clown paintings were in the same colors and had a hand raised and open. Sometimes the left, sometimes the right. Clowns always wore a cap and had painted red lips and blue-rimmed eyes. There were balloons and trees. As a writer, I wonder if he was trying to uncover an innocent part of himself. Or maybe these paintings had secret sexual fantasies and obsessions. His skull pictures show his dark side more directly. Here's one with clashing colors of red, blue, brown, and black. Notice it has a clown-like red cap. One of his most famous is a painting of Disney's Seven Dwarfs playing baseball against the Chicago Cubs. He even got the Cubs players to sign it. And what did he think of religion? Gacy did a pen and ink drawing of Christ against an orange background. You have to wonder if he was placing himself in the same pantheon. A lot of serial killers communicated, and Gacy and Charles Manson admired each other. So Gacy made a portrait of Manson. Which brings up another big name in the murderabilia market. Charles Manson has become almost a myth. He's so famous almost everyone knows whom he killed and when. He and his family murdered 9 people in the 60s. His most famous victim was Sharon Tate, the wife of the film director Roman Polanski. Manson had his own art, psychedelic paintings with different colored magic markers. He also did string art and beads, including scorpions made out of yarn. Notice the crucifix. His stuff is some of the most sought after, but the market is also full of fakes. Almost anything connected to a serial killer can be sold as murderabilia, like Manson's driver's license. Andy Keeline was supposed to have purchased a swastika made from Manson's hair. When Manson died, a probate battle erupted between his grandson and someone claiming to be the beneficiary of his estate. They particularly wanted his ashes. They fought over other belongings too, like music, guitars, hair, and even a pornographic magazine. Then there are the collectibles associated with Ted Bundy. Bundy killed more than 30 women. There aren't any paintings that I know of. However, the star of the series, Ghost Adventures, apparently bought Bundy's glasses for $50,000. That brings us to Jeffrey Dahmer. He murdered and dismembered 17 people in Milwaukee. Jeffrey kept body parts in his refrigerator, and he was hoping to create a sex zombie. The story of his possessions is really kind of interesting. Dahmer's estate was awarded to the families of his victims, and some of them decided to auction off those possessions, including his refrigerator, to make some money. There was an outraged developer in Milwaukee, and he put together an investment group. They bought it for, I believe, about $500,000. They crushed the possessions and buried them in an unknown landfill site. Dahmer was killed in prison. However, items he wrote there are still for sale and highly valued. A greeting card with a typed poem from Keats was listed for $6,000. Letters are also for sale. There are a lot of these. Here's one written by Dennis Rader. He's BTK, Bind, Torture, and Kill. Dennis murdered 10 people in Kansas. So far I've just talked about the art presumably made by the killers themselves. There's also a whole industry of art and knickknacks inspired by serial killers. Nicolas Castelot was a violent criminal as a young man in Paris. He was arrested at 22 and released from prison at 30. He learned art in prison and corresponded with about 20 serial killers in the U.S. Castelot does black and white paintings of famous killers that are all over the internet and displayed in exhibitions. Here's one he did of Ted Bundy. Notice the eyes. Castelot likes to base his work on mugshots and says they are almost mystical, the way they reveal the person. He also does calendars and trading cards and writes true crime books. There are sites all over the internet selling serial killer themed tchotchkes. Mugs, action figures, t-shirts, calendars, and books. Here are a few examples. A Charlie Manson barbecue apron, a Ted Bundy doll, a serial killer wall clock, and something for the Times, an Ed Kemper face mask. Kemper murdered 10 people, including his grandparents and mother. The U.S. government has even gotten in on the act. Whitey Bulger was a mob boss in the Boston area who killed at least 19 people. He was in hiding for about 12 years and captured in Santa Monica, California in 2011. His possessions were sold at auction by U.S. Marshals. Here's the government-sponsored auction table. Things like backpacks, shovels, rings, shirts, clothes, even crosses. Law enforcement also sold items owned by Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber. Kaczynski was a math prodigy who went to Harvard and briefly taught at UC Berkeley. He mailed and hand-delivered bombs that killed 3 and wounded 23. The auction site netted $190,000, which went to his victims and their families. This included his hooded sweatshirt and sunglasses, plus his sneakers. You could even buy his manifesto and the typewriter it was written on. Kaczynski spent 7 years legally trying to retain ownership to these things. So why do killers make this art? To me, that's an easier question than why people buy it. Still, there are a lot of reasons. Many killers are celebrity monsters. They love the fame and publicity their acts generate. Some communicate by letter with each other and compete as to who is the most notorious. Their art prolongs their fame. Then there are the collectors. Dealers who make money selling the art befriend serial killers and urge them to express themselves. Andy Cahan compared it to a sex offender grooming a child. It's a really strange way to think of it. Plus the money the inmates can get for themselves. Some states sell prisoners' work in prison handicraft stores. Still, they aren't supposed to profit from their crimes. So killer artists give their work to collectors and benefit indirectly. This can be extra money to family or friends, extra credits at the commissary. One inmate working with Charles Manson asked that payment be made by a TV set sent to him. Gacy's an example of how money plays into the art. There are thousands of Gacy items, and people think the money paid for them went for sexual favors in prison and extra privileges such as food and cigarettes and maybe drugs. He was open about his prices. I saw him offering to do portraits of people for $100 to $150. In a letter, he mentioned that Richard Speck got $500 a painting. Speck murdered 8 student nurses in the 60s. Charles Manson certainly did a lot of it for the money. He only started art in prison classes. His work became so popular that he formed committees of inmates to produce it. After the art piece was finished, he'd sign it. Why? Because they needed canteen money. It's interesting, but many of the pieces have been judged as not done by Manson because the drawing was too skilled. Another reason is, of course, monotony, and then, of course, the darker motives. Castelot says that he's still a huge fan of violence and death, but has chosen not to be an actor. Instead, under the cover of art, he wants to corrupt minds and spread chaos around him without having to pay the price. Of course, some killers use art to move forward and find redemption. Wayne Lowe is one of these. He went on a shooting rampage at Bard College in 1992. He now stitches intricate embroidery and regards himself as an evolving artist. His work is critically acclaimed. He doesn't make it for money. An intermediary sells the work, and all the proceeds go to a scholarship fund set up by the father of one of his victims. The question I find hardest to answer is why people buy this stuff. It's not great art. People don't normally pay a lot of money for a mediocre painting of a lighthouse, unless the painter is Henry Lee Lucas. He was convicted of killing 11, but probably murdered more than 100. I think Lucas expresses himself better in the other painting he did of a monster with a pointy hat and blood dripping from his mouth. He called this alter ego his beast. So what's the attraction? Apparently people genuinely admire serial killers. There's a shock. Some psychologists say the art is supposed to produce an adrenaline rush that's stronger than a kill in a video game. Others theorize reasons a bit more complex. For instance, by inviting a serial killer into your home, you may be acknowledging the existence of evil and trying to control it. You get to admit that evil into yourself and then push it away. It makes you question your own capacity for these deeds. Anyone is capable of anything, but you're sane and you can turn it off. Murderabilia can also act as a charm. Some believe that an item is infused with a killer's essence, and that essence prevents the same forces from affecting the owners. You could have gotten the same explanation 1,000 years ago. Others say murderabilia art is historically important, especially for killers like Manson, who's so ingrained in the American consciousness as a symbol of horror. None of these explanations is very satisfying to me. I think that something about the physical essence of a killer connects to deep and primitive parts of us. The idea of a monster is an archetype. So why isn't this stuff illegal? eBay banned the sale of murderabilia in 2001. You'd think the government would be able to do the same thing, right? States and individuals have tried. Son of Sam laws were passed to prohibit killers from benefiting from the sale of their work. These laws were put in place in New York in 1977. That was to stop David Berkowitz from making money from selling his story to filmmakers and book publishers. Berkowitz had the moniker the Son of Sam. He killed 6 people in the 70s and said his dog made him do it. Almost all states have passed laws against the sale of murderabilia, but the Supreme Court declared them unconstitutional in 2001. In 2010, Congress put forward a bill specifically outlawing murderabilia. It didn't pass. Texas came up with a pretty innovative solution. Killers can sell book or movie rights, but they can only receive what they would have gotten before they committed their crimes, which is virtually nothing. The best known activist working to eliminate murderabilia is the man who coined the term murderabilia, Andy Keeline. You remember him. Keeline is coordinated with states and the federal government to pass laws to repress murderabilia. Recently, Keeline has teamed up with an unlikely assistant, David Berkowitz, son of Sam. Berkowitz is now a born-again Christian. I can't make this stuff up. When Berkowitz gets a request for art, he forwards it to Keeline. So, this is just a brief introduction to murderabilia, and if you really want to get creeped out, Google it. I personally don't own any of this stuff. My wife would divorce me if I did. And I only really partly understand why people buy it. But it was a part of my first book, and thankfully it has nothing to do with my second book. I'd love to hear from you. If you have any comments or questions about this, please contact me through my website. And I also want to thank Keeline for helping me to make this video.